En primer lugar, el proyecto L1 Rev 1, promoción de la reconciliación, la rendición de cuentas y los derechos humanos en Sri Lanka. Para introducir el proyecto tiene la palabra el distinguido representante del Reino Unido para presentar el proyecto. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Gracias, Señor Presidente. I have the honour to introduce draft resolution L1, Rev 1, entitled Promoting Reconciliation, Accountability and Human Rights in Sri Lanka, which has been proposed by a group of states comprising Canada, Germany, Malawi, Montenegro, North Macedonia, the United States and the UK. The text is largely based on last year's resolution, but has been updated to reflect some of the key developments over the last 18 months in what has been a rather dramatic time for Sri Lanka, an economic crisis, mass protests and a change in government, all of which have had a significant bearing on the human rights situation in the country. The draft both recognises the challenges which Sri Lanka has faced during the period and acknowledges progress where this has occurred. It reflects some of the more recent concerns outlined in the High Commissioner's report, especially the human rights impact of the economic crisis. And it also addresses several long-standing issues which still need to be addressed. These include the lack of accountability for past violations, the many unresolved cases of enforced disappearances, the need for Sri Lanka to meet its own commitments on the devolution of political authority, as well as the need to uphold the rights of all people in Sri Lanka, including Tamils and Muslims. The main requests in the resolution are in operative paragraphs 8 and 18. Paragraph 8 seeks to continue the work initiated in last year's resolution, which created capacity within the Office of the High Commissioner to collect, consolidate, analyse and preserve information to support judicial and other proceedings. This capacity was set up in response to the lack of progress made by Sri Lanka's domestic legal mechanisms towards accountability for past alleged gross violations of human rights. Unfortunately, this capacity has only been fully operational since May of this year and so requires more time to complete its mandate. We are therefore seeking to extend it for a further period as recommended by the former High Commissioner. Paragraph 18 requests further reporting by the OHCHR and proposes to move from an 18-month timeframe to 2 years. This is in recognition of the severe challenges which Sri Lanka is currently facing, allowing Sri Lanka sufficient time and space to make progress on human rights in what we all recognise is a very difficult context. Mr. President, the UK is a close partner to and a long-standing friend of Sri Lanka. Our ties run deep. We bring this resolution in order to help Sri Lanka address ongoing challenges and in order to encourage progress on reconciliation, justice and human rights. I commend this draft resolution to my fellow members of this Council. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. La Secretaría me ha informado que el proyecto L1, Rev 1, tiene 3 copatrocinadores adicionales. Doy ahora la palabra a los Estados miembros del Consejo que deseen hacer comentarios generales. La delegación de la France, vous avez la parole, ambassadeur.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Seigneur Presidente, la France remercie les auteurs de cette résolution. Il est en effet important que ce Conseil puisse continuer à suivre l'évolution de la situation des droits de l'homme au Sri Lanka et à accompagner les autorités dans le processus de réconciliation et de reconstruction qu'elles ont engagé. À ce titre, la France se félicite de la volonté des nouvelles autorités de coopérer avec la communauté internationale et avec les mécanismes des Nations Unies. La reprise de la coopération avec le Haut Commissariat aux droits de l'homme sera une étape importante pour garantir la protection des droits des Sri Lankais. Il importe naturellement que ce Conseil tienne compte de la situation économique extrêmement difficile que traverse le pays ces derniers mois. La France exprime à ce titre toute sa solidarité avec la population sri-lankaise et continuera à s'associer aux efforts internationaux pour lui apporter l'aide humanitaire dont elle a besoin et répondre à ces défis de long terme. C'est dans cet esprit que la France soutient ce projet de résolution. Je vous remercie.
Merci. ¿Alguna otra delegación para comentarios generales? Veo que no es así. Doy ahora la palabra al país concernido. Tiene la palabra el distinguido representante permanente de Sri Lanka. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Mr. President,
Excuse me, the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
A country-specific resolution against Sri Lanka, despite our continued and constructive engagement with this Council on multiple fronts. It is yet another example of the unfortunate divisions and polarization of this Council, which is contrary to its founding principle that, I quote, "The work of the Council shall be guided by principles of universality, impartiality, objectivity, and non-selectivity, constructive international dialogue and cooperation." Sri Lanka categorically rejects the draft resolution HRC51/L1 presented without our consent, despite our effort to engage with the main sponsors. While this resolution may meet the objective of advancing the domestic political consideration of the sponsors, it manifestly unhelpful to Sri Lanka. We call on the members of this Council to reject it by a vote. Mr. President, the list of co-sponsors of the draft resolution amply demonstrates its divisive nature. Last year, many countries braved intense pressure by powerful sponsors and opposed Resolution 46/1 or abstained in the vote. This year, we thank the countries from Asia, Africa, and Latin America who supported Sri Lanka during the informal consultation on this draft. Sri Lanka categorically rejects the resolution, particularly proposal in OP8. As we have repeatedly stated, this so-called external evidence gathering mechanism will have wide-ranging legal and political implications for all countries. Such unprecedented and ad hoc expansion of the mandate of the Council and the functions of a technical secretariat were never envisaged when this Council was established. No sovereign state can accept the superimposition of an external mechanism that runs contrary to the Constitution and which prejudges the commitment of its domestic legal processes. The Council may take note of this. Many countries have already raised serious concern on the budgetary implication of this resolution given its ever-expanding mandates. This is an unhelpful and misdirected drain on the resources of all member states, including the donors, in the midst of an ongoing global crisis. In sharp contrast, we are faced with the dire financial needs of our developing countries to prevent hunger and child malnutrition. We strongly object to the draft resolution pronouncing on domestic economic and financial policy matters which are outside the framework of this forum. Solution to economic and financial crisis faced today by many countries will not be found in the mandate, instrument, or expertise of this Council. Further, it is deeply regrettable that this rambling resolution, running into several pages, ignores the institutional and political stability restored in Sri Lanka, despite the significant political and social challenges. Mr. President, as I outlined in my previous intervention, Sri Lanka remains firmly committed to pursuing tangible progress on human rights throughout our domestic institutions. This includes replacing PTA with a comprehensive national security legislation, the introduction of a constitutional amendment, and a legal framework to strengthen the democratic governance, participation, and rule of law, as well as independent institutional oversight. On reconciliation and human rights, the contours of a domestic truth-seeking mechanism is under advanced discussion as we await the final report of the Presidential Commission. We are of the firm view that any solution should be within the constitutional framework of a sovereign Sri Lanka. On our further engagement with this Council, we look forward to domestic consultation in preparation for our upcoming UPR process. Today, Sri Lanka is making gradual and difficult progress in resolving severe financial situation we are facing. Globally, it is clear that the causes for the prevailing economic crisis affecting all countries are not entirely internal, but also external. We are deeply concerned about many hardships faced by our people and have made provisions for the necessary social protection measures. Sri Lanka has overcome many challenges in the past. We have ended decades of separatist terrorism, successfully managed the human health dimension of the pandemic, and despite economic challenges, succeeded in maintaining a high rank in the Human Development Index, which is the highest in the region. We aspire to build on the economic, political, and social stability restored in the recent months with the support of all our people, including through outreach to the overseas Sri Lankan in a just, fair, and inclusive society which realizes the full enjoyment of the human rights and fundamental freedom. In these circumstances, it is regrettable that this resolution has been tabled. The North-South divide is clearly reflected in the consideration of this resolution as well as in the voting results of the previous resolution on Sri Lanka. For all the above reasons, Sri Lanka rejects this draft resolution and requests the members of this Council to reject this resolution by a vote. Thank you.
Le agradezco al distinguido ministro de Asuntos Exteriores de Sri Lanka por su presencia en esta sala. La Secretaría me ha informado de que hay consecuencias presupuestarias por programas en este proyecto de resolución por un valor de $6.092.300 americanos. Una copia de la declaración ha sido publicada en la extranet del Consejo. Doy ahora la palabra a los miembros del Consejo que deseen hacer explicaciones de voto antes de la votación. Pakistán, embajador, tiene la palabra.
Mr. President, Pakistan has been a consistent advocate for dialogue and cooperation as preferred means to advance universal respect for and enjoyment of human rights. We strongly believe that engagement and consent of the country concerned remain crucial to address human rights concerns and promote compliance with states' international human rights obligations. We appreciate Sri Lanka's active and constructive engagement throughout the informal consultations on the draft text. This demonstrates its commitment to cooperate with international human rights machinery, including this Council. We share the concerns of Sri Lanka and a number of other states that the draft text is intrusive and goes beyond the core group's originally conceived objective of promoting accountability and reconciliation in Sri Lanka in the context of civil war in 2009. The current text delves into areas such as governance, economic management, corruption, rule of law, democratic process, as well as Sri Lanka's engagement with international financial institutions. This level of scrutiny and intrusion, as envisaged in preambular paragraphs PPs 8, 9, 10, and operative paragraphs 4, 5, and 8, would not be even acceptable to any sovereign state, including the core group. Mr. President, L1 Rev 1 fails to condemn the horrendous terrorist acts committed by LTTE and shies away from a call for accountability of the LTTE and its sponsors and financiers. During the course of informal consultations, a number of states had explained that OP8 lacks balance, proportionality, and consistency, including with other key elements of the draft text. For example, PPs 5 and 17 of the text reaffirm the sovereignty of Sri Lanka and welcome its continued engagement with the UN and its human rights mechanisms. However, these provisions are at complete variance with the legally untenable external accountability mechanism as foreseen in OP8. We note that such provisions are neither grounded in nor are drawn from the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, the founding UNGA Resolution 60/251, and the IB package. Mr. President, at a critical time when the people of Sri Lanka expect demonstration of global solidarity and support to overcome its economic challenges, which are not entirely of Sri Lanka's own making, the core group chose a path that has the potential to exacerbate the problems instead of improving the situation, including with respect to the ongoing efforts towards accountability and reconciliation. Although impacts may vary depending on level of development and economy's resilience, but the last 3 years have clearly shown that no single country can claim immunity from the devastating socio-economic impacts of COVID, global liquidity crunch, and the climate catastrophe. Mr. President, in view of these reasons, Pakistan delegations call the draft resolution to vote and would vote against it. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Tem a palavra a delegação do Brasil. Muito obrigado,
caríssimo Sr. Presidente. Brazil thanks the core group for presenting the draft resolution on Sri Lanka. We take note with appreciation of the engagement of Sri Lanka during the negotiations as a proof of goodwill. We agree with their comments regarding the need to avoid politicization of the work of the Council and reiterate our position that the engagement and cooperation of the concerned country is key to the success of the Council's initiatives. While we acknowledge that progress was achieved on the ground in Sri Lanka, we understand that many countries believe the situation of the country remains of interest to this Council. We welcome the fact that the final text acknowledges the efforts undergone by the government to address the ongoing economic crisis and its commitment towards institutional reforms, but also highlights the important challenges regarding the full enjoyment of the human rights and fundamental freedoms of the Sri Lankan people. During the negotiations, Brazil proposed amendments aimed at bringing balance to the text and within the Council's agenda. We would like to thank the core group for incorporating some of our proposals, which rendered the final text a more constructive approach. We regret, however, that our proposal to strengthen the technical cooperation and assistance dimension of the text was not taken on board. In light of recent Sri Lankan efforts and constructive engagement, it is our belief that this resolution should have a greater focus on the responsibility of the international community to support the country in its recovery, including through international cooperation and assistance. We believe this resolution would be better framed under our agenda item 10. In light of these considerations, Brazil will abstain on the draft resolution on Sri Lanka. I thank you.
Gracias. Tiene la palabra Japón.
Thank you. Japan has the floor.
Gracias, señor presidente. Japan has duly taken note of the discussion on the human rights situation in Sri Lanka, including at the informal consultation with the member states and various stakeholders. While recognizing the work done by the Sri Lanka government to date, Japan is of the view that various steps will need to be taken in order to improve the human rights situation and to foster reconciliation in the country. Japan therefore emphasizes the need for Sri Lanka to take further necessary measures. The government of Sri Lanka is primarily responsible for improving the human rights situation in the country. Japan strongly believes that the government's own initiative, efforts, and commitments are indispensable to achieve real change on the ground. Japan considers it preferable for the international society to foster Sri Lanka's own efforts to improve the human rights situation in the country. For these reasons, Japan will abstain from voting on this draft resolution. Gracias.
Gracias. Tiene la palabra China.
China has the floor. 主席先生，中国赞赏斯里兰卡政府致力于促进和保护人权，推动经济社会可持续发展，提高人民生活水平，保障弱势群体的权利，推进民主和解，打击恐怖主义。作为斯里兰卡传统友好邻邦，中方坚定支持斯里兰卡维护国家主权和独立，维护社会稳定，实现经济复苏。相信斯里兰卡政府一定能够带领人民克服困难。我们赞赏地注意到，斯里兰卡代表团带着最大的诚意，积极参与决议草案的磋商，并提出了一系列富有建设性的意见。然而，遗憾的是，提案国一意孤行，对当事国的意见视而不见，特别是当事国反对特别报告员延期的意见。我们对此感到遗憾。这一决议草案无视斯里兰卡政府为促进和保护人权所做的努力和取得的成就，没有得到当事国的认同，是又一个政治化的产物。 必然无法为斯里兰卡促进和保护人权发挥积极作用。人权理事会的工作应当遵循普遍性、公正性、客观性和非选择性等原则。各方应通过真正的对话与合作，促进和保护人权，而不应当采取双重标准和把人权问题政治化。我们主张各国恪守联合国宪章宗旨和原则，尊重其他国家的主权和独立，摒弃以人权为借口干涉别国内政、损害别国的主权、破坏国际合作的做法。鉴此，中方将对 L1号决议草案投反对票，并呼吁人权理事会成员国共同反对这一决议草案。谢谢。
Gracias. Tiene la palabra India.
Thank you. India has the floor.
Ambassador.
Mr. President, as an immediate neighbor, India has substantively contributed to the relief, rehabilitation, resettlement, and reconstruction process in Sri Lanka after 2009. More recently, since January this year, India has stepped up and provided unprecedented assistance to the people of Sri Lanka to face the challenges of the recent economic crisis. In finding a lasting and effective solution for peace and reconciliation in Sri Lanka, India has always been guided by the two fundamental principles of support to the aspirations of the Tamil for equality, justice, dignity, and peace and unity, territorial integrity and sovereignty of Sri Lanka. While we have taken note of the commitments by the government of Sri Lanka on issues of implementation of the commitments in the spirit of the 13th Constitutional Amendment, meaningful devolution, and the early conduct of provincial elections, we believe that the progress towards the same remains inadequate. Accordingly, we urge the government of Sri Lanka to work meaningfully towards early implementation of these commitments. Achieving prosperity for all Sri Lankans and realizing the legitimate aspirations of Tamils of Sri Lanka for prosperity, dignity, and peace are the two sides of the same coin. Mr. President, India will continue to work with Sri Lanka and the international community to attain the related objectives of legitimate aspirations of Tamils of Sri Lanka and prosperity for all Sri Lankans. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Tiene la palabra República de Corea.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Republic of Korea notes with appreciation that the government of Sri Lanka has made various efforts to promote national reconciliation, reconstruction, and prosperity. These efforts notably include the establishment of the Presidential Commission of Inquiry, the operation of Office of Missing Persons, and the Office of Reparation, the introduction of the National Reparation Policy and Guidelines, and the proposed amendment to the Constitution, which aims to restore the independence of key national institutions and the judiciary. We take particular note that the government of Sri Lanka has made continued efforts to promote the human rights situation even during this difficult time of economic crisis. As a country which went through a turbulent period of democratization, the Republic of Korea has been a supporter of Sri Lanka's transitional process. When assuming the chairmanship of the UN Peacekeeping Commission in 2017, Korea convened the first meeting on Sri Lanka. We also supported the country's transitional process through the Peace Building Fund. However, in the hope that Sri Lanka will achieve tangible progress through the close cooperation with the international community, including the UN human rights mechanisms, the Republic of Korea has decided to maintain its previous voting position on the resolution. We will continue to examine our stance as we closely monitor the progress on the ground. The Republic of Korea sincerely hopes that the government of Sri Lanka will make further advancements in national reconstruction and reconciliation, and also looks forward to closely cooperating with the Sri Lankan government. I thank you.
Gracias. Tiene la palabra Venezuela, embajador.
Gracias, presidente. Buenas tardes a todas y todos. Venezuela reitera su oposición a la práctica selectiva de algunos países en este Consejo que, con motivaciones meramente políticas, presentan iniciativas como este proyecto de resolución L1-REV1 en contra de la República Democrática Socialista de Sri Lanka. Tales iniciativas no cuentan con el concurso del país concernido y violan los principios de respeto a la soberanía y la no injerencia en los asuntos internos de los Estados. Preocupa profundamente que en el texto del proyecto de resolución se siga pretendiendo establecer competencias a la Oficina del Alto Comisionado para recolectar evidencia criminal para futuros procesos judiciales o al órgano de instrucción penal en violación al mandato contenido en la resolución 48-141 de la Asamblea General que le dio creación. Es lamentable que los patrocinadores del proyecto de resolución insistan en imponer mediante esta hostil iniciativa mecanismos de monitoreo y tutelaje contra Sri Lanka sin su consentimiento, ignorando los grandes esfuerzos adelantados por su gobierno para dar cumplimiento a sus compromisos en materia de derechos humanos desde la restauración de la paz en 2009. Señor presidente, Venezuela rechaza por injustificados los intentos injerencistas en el proceso interno que vive Sri Lanka hacia su definitiva reconciliación nacional. Alertamos sobre el grave riesgo de proyectos de resolución de carácter sesgado e intervencionista que reeditan las anacrónicas prácticas y el modo de proceder selectivo de algunos países hegemónicos y sus aliados en este Consejo, atentando contra la independencia y soberanía de los países del sur. Condenamos, por tanto, la selectividad, la politización y los dobles estándares patentados en estas iniciativas que establecen hostiles mandatos con los cuales se persigue preservar oscuros intereses de quienes las impulsan y que además desangran financieramente el sistema con más de 6 millones de dólares que pudieran ser mejor utilizados para apoyar a los países menos adelantados en su situación de derechos humanos. Esta práctica de despilfarro, por cierto, parece muy común ahora en este Consejo. Algunos gobiernos de los países que promueven estos proyectos de resolución han cometido y cometen serias violaciones a los derechos humanos y contra ellos desafortunadamente no se presentan iniciativas similares. Sri Lanka coopera hoy activamente con este Consejo y sus mecanismos y con la Oficina del Alto Comisionado, mostrando los grandes logros alcanzados en la promoción y protección de los derechos humanos de su pueblo. Este proyecto de resolución portal no debería tener justificación y Venezuela se opone al proyecto L1-REV1 votando en contra cuando ocurra, instando además a todos los miembros de este Consejo a proceder de la misma manera. Gracias, señor presidente.
Gracias. Veo que no hay ninguna otra solicitud. A solicitud de la delegación de Pakistán, el Consejo procederá ahora a una votación registrada sobre el proyecto de resolución L1-REV1. Pido a la Secretaría que abra el dispositivo de votación y solicito a las delegaciones que registren su voto, por favor. Han registrado todas las delegaciones su voto. Pido por favor que comprueben si está adecuadamente reflejado en la pantalla. Si es así, pido a la Secretaría que cierre el dispositivo de votación. Los resultados de la votación registrada son los siguientes: 20 votos a favor, 7 votos en contra, 20 abstenciones. Por lo tanto, el proyecto L1-REV1, promoción de la reconciliación, la rendición de cuentas y los derechos humanos en Sri Lanka, queda adoptado.